Record. Hello again to another episode of GK Ask the Expert. Today we want to reiterate on the CK efficient development. We are just focusing on a new aspect I found useful recently and which improves the development cycle, in my opinion, a lot. If it works, maybe also in your environment. And we'll just try to share what I'm working with daily. Especially recently, I've seen many new users to ZK who didn't know or who have, I would say, trouble restarting their application too often. It takes a long time, especially when we try to support and we wait for 10 minutes for a server to restart to test a few things. That's sometimes just less efficient. That's why we try to be to improve this turnaround by avoiding restarts if possible, or keeping the restarts as short as possible, and also the compile times between the restarts should be, well, in the best case, not existing. So let's run through the features. So today, I have an example project that we run with my favorite build tools, Jetty Runner and webapp-runner. Not build tools, run tools, which are run classes that run an embedded Jetty or an embedded Tomcat directly from the IDE without having to build a WAR file. So it saves the zipping time. It will use the class path directly in the IDE, so that it can recompile single files. It doesn't have to recompile everything every time. So we benefit from what the IDE is doing in the background. My demonstration project is a simple module, a multi-module project. I have 3 modules: a WAR module, an application module, which contains some extra code that will be a separate jar file, and the additional development config to keep it out of our real application. I can demonstrate both the same project in IntelliJ and Eclipse, which I think are the most popular IDEs. I'm quite certain that this also works in NetBeans if this is relevant to someone, because I'm not using any plugins besides the default Maven plugin that are provided by every current IDE. And then we just see how many things we can change, or which things we can change without restarting: XUL files, JavaScript files, CSS files, property files. And the new thing I would like to focus on is the Java hot swapping, which I recently found just working. Previously, I tried this and I never got it to work, but suddenly there was a pre-bundled version available, which is also maintained. There was just a new version 2 days ago with the latest Java 11 build, so quite nice. I'm currently using this every day, and so far it seems good. That's why I wanted to feature it today. Yeah, and of course we go through the configs necessary to do this. So let's start with the project structure. Already mentioned, we have 3 projects, 3 modules configured in my base POM file. Now we have module, app, war, and config. War file being a default war project with a web app folder, and the test case to run the test. So if we have some time, you also run the test case in the end, but it's something you can also run yourself when you try out the source code later. And here are some resources of my war file. And to demonstrate the multiple modules, we have all our Java code and additional resources in the application module. So here we have some Java code, in this case just a simple view model. We're trying to build something extra later, and some resource files just to in the default ZK resource folder, which is the web package. So everything below web are the resources inside a ZK application, and these can be bundled into any kind of jar files. So if you need some resources in a modular way, you can put resources in multiple jar files, and ZK will find them on the class path. It could be XUL files in here, JavaScript files, CSS files, property files, configuration files, and also Java classes, of course. And the development config project contains just the configuration I want to use during the run, during the development, just to keep it separate. So here we have the dependencies. It uses my application jar file. It uses my demo war file. It adds the logging, because logging is no longer provided by default in ZK since version 9.5, I think, which is, I think, a good thing. It shouldn't be provided. Should be the choice of everyone themselves. So I just picked this one, and you can use any SLF4J logging here. Otherwise, you won't see any logs. Yeah, that's why you need to add it now. And then I have a few profiles, one for running with Tomcat, one for running with Jetty, to keep the configuration separate. And also these classes likely conflict because they both import the same Servlet API classes or similar classes into the class path, and you can only have one active at a time. Then the configuration contains also of a meta info config file, which is similar to ZK config. That's something you can place into a jar file. And here are all the config switches we will try out in a minute. There's my logging config. Just log everything in info. Otherwise, debug is the default. It's a bit too much to read. There is a package I've got to delete. And there is my example config, which is now the new, which contains a workaround for a feature that is not yet implemented to enable the hot class reloading also with view models, because the annotations were cached and it needs to clear the caches in between your builds. Otherwise, it will not find the new methods if you rename a method or if you change annotations pointing to other methods. Also, it clears the bean expression language cache, so that all the bean expressions can be evaluated if property names change dynamically. Yeah, and as always, we run this from our application. We have a run configuration. Oh, this is the feature I want to show later, so I need to disable this. And we just run this with a Java 11. Java 11 will complain about this, so I just put a D in front of it. It doesn't mean disabled, but it's for me a good good hint that I know that this is a disabled property, because with a D prefix you can put anything, and otherwise Java will complain that this configuration doesn't exist. But with D it accepts everything, and it doesn't complain. The Jetty runner is deprecated right now, but I've been talking to them on a GitHub thread, and they plan to keep it. So in the next version of Jetty, hopefully this is also contained and still working. Right now I've tested with Jetty 10, doesn't work yet, posted a bug. I hope they get this running at some point, or someone else has to debug, or maybe me, I don't know. Yeah, what I'm doing also is here specify my war folder. So I'm running the war file directly from source, not from a war file. So I just say my war folder is, because I'm running the dev config project, the class path of this one, I go one level up, ... and then into the war folder source main web app, what we've seen earlier. Yeah, why not just run it for now? And where's the start here? I usually run this, or I always automatically click the debug icon. So as soon as you run something in debug mode, the class path, the class path will be somewhat connected. So whenever you recompile a file, JDK will by default try to recompile this and load changes from the class path. And the same is true for resources on the class path we've seen in our application module. Yeah, our JavaScript files and Zool files and CSS files. So we just do a simple resource test. I haven't opened my war file yet. So my war file contains source main web app, my resources file, for example. Here I'm just including lots of different resources from different places. I have some resources locally in my webinf folder. I have some resources inside my module in the class path, which is prefixed with a tilde dot syntax in ZK. Well, just see if this one is showing something. So open the browser and open the resources.zool. Yeah, so what we see here is we have our test button, which will use a custom style, which is coming from my styles CSS. It makes the button green. My script will print something to the console that it's being loaded. So in the browser DevTools, we see that there is a script executed. It's just printing out the log. And in the same way, my local script has executed from my WARF project. And we see the included Zool files from different locations. So we see it's including my part once using the include tag, or they're using the apply element. So they are all able to load from a jar module. And also I have some property, some language property file, just to see that I can also change my label properties. With the default configuration, we can't change many of these files because ZK is caching them for production systems. So we need to disable all these caches before we can update the files and have our improve our turnaround. Otherwise, we need to restart every time we change one of these files. So in our development config, just commented everything out. We just comment in most of the things. This is for debugging. So if you need the non-minified code, that's a good flag. I just added everything you want. Or if you want to debug MVVM, this will output a lot. So I rarely disable it by default. I mostly disable it, and we disable all the caches. So if you're working with these kind of files, WPD or WCS files, you can enable them. The Zool cache is for these Zool files here that are inside the class path. The class web resource cache is for all the resource files in the web folder, in the web package. It's called class web resource because this is the class path inside the web folder. And this will otherwise tell the browser to cache the file. So you always have to press Control F5 or disable the cache in order to see the updates. So I always disable this for development. The same thing for the labels cache. If you want to update property files, this is a new flag since, I don't know, ZK. I wonder which version it was. Control click, come on, open. I think it was added in 8.6 or something. The link is wrong. Okay, I will update this before we go live, before I share the code. But this is recently added, so we can also reload the labels in the same way the Zool cache was also added recently, or maybe 2 years ago, or not too long ago. Okay, everything is enabled or disabled, every cache, except for our hot code replacement feature. So what we can do is we can restart, and just to show how long it takes to restart the server. Of course, this application is very, very simple. It doesn't load any database, but even with the screen sharing and the CPU under stress, it loads in 5 seconds. Sometimes you get it down until 2.5 or 3 seconds if the CPU is currently not too busy. So Tomcat itself can start quickly, or Jetty. If we use the embedded version here, the Jetty runner, this is already very useful. And now we can start changing files. Now we just make an example of each. So we load the page once. So we have our test button. We make this window slightly smaller. So we have these side by side. And we just make a change in everything. So I think we covered this in the previous session. We make the background color of the button red. We reload, and that's what I mentioned. The browser still has, because we previously ran this application with the cache enabled. The browser caches this, so we can disable the cache in Chrome. in the developer tools, and then it can. Nah, come on. Did I forget to say? Yes, there's one thing before this works, because it's on the class path, we need to hit compile. This will be a build, recompile this file. Even though it's a CSS file, it just needs to be updated on the class path. So it goes from the source folder into the build folder, because these are the class path folders. The class path folders that are used by the running application. And then we see the button turns red, or we make it blue. Control Shift F9 is the shortcut, so I don't always press the same thing. Then we see it's busy, and we reload, and then the button gets blue. So this should always work. Simple change, CSS files, go live directly. Same with script files. Yeah, we change this. We just output some extra text. Something, Control Shift F9, now recompile. In Eclipse, for example, if you have autocompile enabled, you just save the file, Control S, and it will automatically swap it on the class path. And there's my change. JavaScript file done. I have an included Zool file. I want to add something into the Zool file. Control Shift F9, recompile, and reload. The update is here. With the Zool files, or with any of these resource files, there is sometimes a problem on Windows systems, for which there is an extra development config, a run config for Jetty, that disables this kind of use file mapped buffer. So if you have problems with Windows system with these resource files, you need to run with a special config here for Jetty. Tomcat doesn't have this problem. Only Jetty uses some optimization that doesn't work well, at least in older versions, with Windows. Okay, so we ran our Zool file. I'll just change it back. Fine over Control Shift F9, recompile, and now the changes work multiple times. Of course, we can change the file directly in our web application folder, but I think this is something that everyone got to work once. So just add some extra label here. These ones you only need to save, or because the web-in folder or the web app folder is automatically watched by ZK. It's a different thing than class path. This is the resource folder of the web application, which is watched by default. So we see the updated appearing automatically. And the same thing with our language properties. Now, if we want to change one of these labels, we just add something and reload the file, and the label is updated. So these things are nothing new. This worked before. So I think many of you have seen this already in the previous things. Oh, someone is unmuted. Okay. Yes, Andrea, you are unmuted. So maybe mute yourself if you want to avoid getting recorded if there's a noise. Okay. Otherwise, thanks for the hint. Cool. Okay. So these are the trivial things. Yeah. What else do we have? Yeah, the resources.zool. Otherwise, of course we can add ZK components. There we add a new button. I think you've done this all the time. The label is test. Yeah, so there's a new button. I sometimes see that people have to restart their servers to change Zool files, which is very, very weird, because everything in this web app folder in the WAR file is normally watched. So that's why I'm not using the built-in plugins of the IDEs regarding Tomcat or Jetty or whatever they're called. Usually in some kind of servers tab. I never understand what they do, so excuse me if I can't comment on these. I've been trying to use them in the past in both Eclipse and IntelliJ, and I never understood the different states between redeployment, publishing, restarting, refreshing. There are so many options, and sometimes it just doesn't work. That's why I'm using these, or that's why I found these Jetty runner and Tomcat runner more useful to me. If you know how to operate your plugins, of course, keep using them. If they manage to update the class path in real time, then that's also fine. ZK will not stop this from happening. Yes, this works with the class path. So it's independent of how it's running, and because Spring Boot is also using an embedded Jetty or an embedded Tomcat or an embedded Undertow, which is the third engine they provide. In Spring Boot, it's even easier. In Spring Boot, you already have a runnable class that you run by yourself. So you don't even need this plugin. So yeah, Spring Boot is a no-brainer. Yeah, and because in Spring Boot, you have to move everything into the class path because you don't have the web apps folder. We have all these caches we need to disable so that this works more smoothly. Okay, let's press on a bit. So I have many files open right now. So just see what can we do next. I have a plan. Where's my plan? Training notes here. So we've seen the project. It runs. Yeah, we just check the same thing with the Tomcat. So for the Tomcat, we need to switch the Maven profile. There's a nice profile switcher in IntelliJ. There's a similar one in Eclipse, where we just say, I want to use my Tomcat profile. I'll just stop my current run. Of course, then I have to restart because I'm using a different server. And I think I need to refresh once. And then you will see that my run configuration becomes invalid because the Jetty runner disappears from the current class path. And instead, the Tomcat runner will be available. So here it's Tomcat runner is now no longer red flagged, and the Jetty runner will be complaining in a second. You see it's indexing my dependencies. Okay, so now Jetty is disabled. So we just use Tomcat and run the Tomcat in a similar way. It starts slightly slow. I think it takes 2 seconds longer to start by itself. Just doesn't show a nice number I can compare easily. So it just feels like 1 or 2 seconds slower. And now we have a Tomcat running. And since we are just running a jar, a main class, everything is the same as before. We change our files. Everything is loaded from the class path. And we don't need to build there. We don't need a maven clean package, maven clean install, or any of these things. As long as the IDE is not confused by itself, it works. If the class path is always clean and the incremental compilation works, this is what the IDE should offer to you. Okay, just quickly go into Eclipse just to demonstrate that this works, and then we go to the. I know, time is a bit advanced. No, don't go into Eclipse right now. We just enable the development, the DCEVM. I think it's called Dynamic Code Evolution Virtual Machine. And what I recently found is that they provided a bundle, a pre-bundled JDK. So what I do is I just go to this Java Open JDK and download the latest Java 11 version. So they provide a bundle for Java 8 and for Java 11. Java 8 is a bit outdated. It's not maintained well anymore. It doesn't work on Windows nicely. So one of my workmates managed to get it run on Windows, but the 11 just works out of the box. So pick the 11 one if you can, and it can also run your Java 8 projects, unless there's something weird going on. Yeah, I just downloaded it. There was just an update 2 days ago. So what I did is I downloaded the zip file here from the releases, unzipped it into one of my virtual machines. Right now I'm using this one here, but now we just switch to the latest version. So what we do is we configure a virtual machine inside the IDE. We have and there's a similar config also in Eclipse. we pick our module settings. That's where you can choose your SDK. You can have different versions. For example, I have the DCEVM. I just pick a different folder. Just pick, select more JDK home from disk, and I pick the new one. I just downloaded this one. Okay, so that's how you pick a new version. And then in your run, then this is available inside your run configuration. So now it will point to the latest version 11.10. It's well documented how it works. Now you enable the Hotswap agent. I think it comes with two modules. The DCEVM allows all this hot code replacement, and the Hotswap agent, as far as I understand it, is adding some automatic features to it, like clearing caches by JDK that contain I don't know, property method handles and all these kind of things. It's clearing these caches automatically when something changes. And there are more plugins. Don't be confused. There is a ZK plugin which is not official. I tried it. It's supported by someone, or it's provided by some external person, and it's not maintained since a long time. So I know it doesn't work right now with the current ZK version. So don't try it right now. And I provide an alternative. It's just trying to disable more caches in ZK that are related to class loading. Because we chose Tomcat Runner, now there's a different main class, and we enabled the Hotswap agent as documented by the Java JDK. So they just say here, add this flag, Hotswap core, and we just run it again, and then we see on the we see something else in the console. You see it's running. It's picking up my new binaries, the DCEVM 11.10. It is running enable the Hotswap agent, which has a few plugins bundled. Most important, I think, is the JDK plugin, which makes sure that these property handles I managed before are not cached. And otherwise, everything is as before. It's a fully compliant JDK, allowing more Java changes. And now we go live into our view model, for example. We have our main Zool, a trivial main class. Only thing it has is a main VM and a few command bindings. And here in my application, I have my view model. And just see if it still works. It's, I think, called main.zool. Yeah, so I have my view model. It's rendering something initially. I click a button. It's outputting a label. So if we want to change some code, something that works already by default in JDK without the extra virtual machine is changing method bodies. So if I just change a string here, Control-Shift-F9, recompile, and update, it's picking up my code changes instantly. What didn't work previously is changing method names. For example, I changed this to update2. And because now this will mean that my command name changes, I also need to change my command name in my view model, in my Zool file. And here, of course, Control-Shift-F9. Default JDK will just abort and say Hotswap failed. And here it says one class reloaded. And we click the button directly. Now it says invoke, because now the ZK caches break something. That's why there is the ZK plugin, and that's why I provide this workaround today, which is configured inside my my development config. It's these AutoClear caches. It uses a bit of reflection to clear a few cache maps inside ZK. Something internal, which we try to make configurable with the next one of the next versions. But it's so easy to apply. I just have a simple listener which will just clear these caches every time I click a button. Every time a request is arriving at server side, it will clear these caches for the bean resolver and for the MVVM. Of course, this needs a restart because I changed some config. I don't have a hot config reloading yet. Would also be interesting, but this is at least rare enough that it doesn't need this. Okay, so server has restarted. So we reload this file. Of course, now it works because we restarted the server. So we change our method name back. Just put a breakpoint here to prove that we really end up in the version update 2. So this is the changed method name, and we just change it back to update time. Control-Shift F9, and in the main.zool also change it to update time. Today the CPU is really under stress. Okay, and continue my breakpoint. And now if we click the button again, it says, can it find any method that is annotated with update 2? Yes, of course. Did we save this file? Come on, you can do it. And now it arrives in my new method. So it really managed to, without restarting the server, change a method name. What we can also do is we can add parameters. Add a binding parameter. Add binding param. Just call it my param. Make it a string my parameter, because this is something that often happens during development. You find out, oh, I need a parameter in my command, and I want to add it to my command. So I just add a parameter here. My param equals single quotes test. And of course, I want to log this. I change my string back to this, and I add my param. Continue my breakpoint and click the button again. And in my console, I update the time. I should be, where's my log? Oh no, current time updated. Do you see my param? Did I recompile? Okay, update time. Yeah, there it is. Right now it's null. So I must have been doing something wrong. Add binding param my param in the main.zool my param equals test. Yes, because I changed the Zool file, of course, I have to reload the Zool file so that the command bindings are parsed again, because that's not Java code. And then my test is there. So I can change method signatures, I can rename methods, I can add annotations. These things just work with this DCEVM, so that's much more advanced than the default hot code replacement by JVM. It's cheaper than the JRebel because it costs a lot of money, and this one is for free, this tool. What I noticed from time to time, there are a few CPU spikes when recompiling, so it might need a few restarts after, I don't know how long. So it doesn't work forever efficiently. What did I miss? Yes, now we also can add new properties. Now we just output something new. I just output a new test vm.new prop. And we go to view model, add a private string new prop. We add a getter for my new prop, and we initialize this with equals something. Control-Shift F9, recompile. It doesn't complain, hopefully, about the recompilation. And because it's a static label, I reload the page and my new property should print on the page. There it is. And now I can also rename these fields. If I say, I want to rename Alt F6, no, Shift F6 here. I want to rename this new prop test. Yeah, it even asked me if I want to rename the getter. Okay, I want to do this. Change my getter. Wait, start the compilation first. Okay. And here we say, give me the new prop test. And here we reload the page. And it still prints. If we put a breakpoint in this method and we reload the page, we can see on the call stack that the method name really changed, even in the stack trace. So I'm quite happy this worked. Yes, so what is else on the script? I think there was something more. Forgot. So we have, we go to Eclipse, of course. We checked the config already. I know this can also work in JDK8. It's just more tedious to set up, but they also provide a JDK that already has the DCEVM. So this hotcode replacement enabled, but somehow you have to configure the Hotswap agent manually, and it's a bit more tedious. So if you want to use JDK8 and have problems, get back to us. At least one in our team knows how to how to do this, did this in the past, if this is relevant for you. The configuration we already saw. Yeah, we just enabled all the flags we have. And in the training notes, project structure. So what we did is we update the modules without restarting. We have yes, I'll just show the default. What happens when we don't use this DCEVM? I'm sure you've seen this before and got annoyed by it. So I have to disable this flag. Apply, OK, and restart. You see now it's using the default Java 11 on my platform. And now as soon as you start, or we load the page, of course it works. We can call our methods initially. The session was timed out, OK. So everything is working. But as soon as we change a name, press Ctrl-Shift F9 to recompile, it will complain that can't rename methods. Hotswap failed, and then you have to restart your server. So I don't know how much time we already saved by not having to restart this several times. We already did. Yeah. So what do we have? Yes. Yes. Another benefit of these Tomcat runner jetty runners is you can easily switch the version by changing a maven dependency. So if you want to test with a different Tomcat version, for example, we want to use Tomcat. The latest version just came out a few days ago. So we just switch our version to 9.0.41. Have to update the maven dependencies. Then we should see that it's downloading, so it's trying to resolve the dependencies. Our dev config should load this thing called, they changed their package. And previously it was called something like org.jzmon, and now they moved to com heroku. I don't know if they make this a paid service at some point, but so far it's free and available. And the jetty is, as far as I know, also open source and free to use. It's downloading. Already updated the Tomcat version. So we just stop our running project and restart. And then we should have a new running version with a new Tomcat version. So very often you have these smaller Tomcat upgrades and you want to see if a new security patch works No more downloading a WAR file into or a zip file, unzipping it, putting it somewhere, making sure the WAR file is deployed in the new location. I found this tedious in the past, and here it's just adding a new Maven dependency and things are starting up again. And we have the new Tomcat. Somewhere it prints out here, running on the new version. Or if you need to go back to Tomcat 8.5, they support a few older versions also. We can go back quite far. And the same thing with Jetty. You can use the latest version, which just came out, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. Okay, so just to double check it works still, run. Session is offline. Okay, and run. Things are working. And also we get nice error messages of Apache Tomcat 9.04. So really does what we want. So let's switch to Eclipse, just to not ignore everyone else here whose favorite IDE is Eclipse. I have this in a different folder. My Eclipse is here. Eclipse, I just downloaded the latest version, available earlier this week. I don't know when. Just started. And since this is a Maven project, it just runs in the same way as in IntelliJ. It doesn't depend on any specific plugins of the IDE, so you can choose which IDE you want to use. It's just the same project in a different IDE. Okay, so, okay. Oh, there's a training session today. Cool. Which one was it? Here, efficient development. So this is today. And for Eclipse, I already provided the run configurations here. So it looks slightly different, of course. Here's the run configurations already predefined, and we pick our debug configuration. For example, Jetty runner will run this class. Tomcat runner will run, of course, the webapp-runner main class. Jetty with the context for Windows will use a slightly different argument, because the default Jetty will use the source folder directly, and this one will use a config file, a Jetty config context, which contains the same folder, yeah, dot something, just this extra configuration we saw for Windows. Here you see it just has the same thing in a config file instead of a parameter at command line. I prefer the command line, but if needed, if you have problems on Windows, this one is important. I'll just run it. First, switch to the profile. So because also the class path is depending on the Maven profile, we have to switch the profile. So there is this select Maven profile option here, where you can also pick between Tomcat and Jetty. So I just say I want to use Jetty now. So I'm able to run the Jetty run configuration. Here is the Jetty runner, and the arguments are source main web app. The JRE is my Java 11 DCEVM, and the VM arguments, I need to add the -x colon Hotswap agent equals core, and apply and debug. Now, we didn't do anything wrong. It already starts the Hotswap agent, and it's started up in 4 seconds. I find somehow in Eclipse it's starting up in general a bit faster than in IntelliJ. Well, only a few seconds, so it doesn't make a big difference. And now we just do the same exercise. Then we go into our main view model, and first we see if it's running. Check that our page is running. Okay, but we wanted the main Zool. Now we can update everything and we revert our changes we made previously. We don't want the my param anymore. Just remove it from the method body, remove it from the binding parameter, and we change it from the Zool file. Source main web app main.zool. Just remove our parameter here. In Eclipse, you just save the file and it should already be there. So if I reload this, the test should go away. If I reload, the property goes away. Oh no, it's still here. I just save the file and it's already here. So now it's gone. So the same mechanism works in Eclipse. Same files, same configuration, same run class, no extra plugin. That's what I prefer. Sometimes they have maybe issues with the class path because it's you're adding the whole Tomcat container into the class path or the jetty. And sometimes maybe only jetty works and not Tomcat, or only Tomcat works and not jetty. But during development, I somehow often don't care. Just need something running, and I need the changes to be done quickly, so I don't need to restart more often. Yes. So where is my what else can we look at? I think today I'm a bit faster than normal. What do we have? The yeah, we changed the versions. We talked about the shortcuts to restart. I mentioned the AutoClear caches. Right. I posted this feature request, and the source code of the AutoClear cache class is added to this ticket. I added the gist, so it's just available for everyone. And here in the code, you can pick if you want to update for each desktop init or for each request. And maybe you only want to refresh when you refresh the browser. So maybe you want to not change too often to have a I don't know, to test also that the caches work, if the caches are enabled. So they're not always clearing, not every request. And the cool part is you can change these at runtime. You can swap these because we have Hotswap. Now we just saying, because it's Java config, we can just switch this and say, okay, we only want to clear our caches during page reload. Save the file and we reload the page, check the console, we clear the console. What I did is I output some logs whenever the caches reload. I thought I did. Does someone know why Eclipse doesn't debug? Is this the right? This is not Eclipse. This is IntelliJ. Here we clear the console. And now, if we reload the page, it clears all these caches. And we see here, cache cleared, cleared, cleared. But if we click a button, I think I changed it in the wrong IDE. So Eclipse didn't notice that I changed it. There's something I don't recommend working in two IDEs at the same time. That's just for this task here. Okay, so we just change something again, save again, so it recompiles, and now we clear the logs once again, clear, and now it should only refresh when we refresh the page. So it's showing these logs when we refresh, and when we click the button, it doesn't clear the caches. But if we want to re-enable this, then we just go back, enable clearing during execution init, save the file, it's automatically recompiled. I click the button and it clears instantly without any refresh. So that's how fast this can work. Okay. I think I'm ready for some questions or remarks or doubts or whatever you have on your mind about this. Otherwise, I can also show the test, our Zets tool, but this is yeah. Why not? For anyway, if you have a question, put in the chat. Yeah? Otherwise, I just continue with this testing tool. So what is also very useful during development if you have test cases. ZK is, of course, not the easiest framework to test. That's what we admit. So if you can move or implement most of your test cases with Zets, because this can test all your application logic, the server-side logic, like your view models or your composers, and it can test the Zool files render without exceptions. It doesn't test the browser. It only simulates the network requests and responses, but it doesn't run any JavaScript, and it doesn't run in the browser. That's why they're also faster to execute, because they don't start a browser. They're not depending on the browser version. So if you want to run one of these tests, you need the dependency Zets, and you can use JUnit or TestNG or whichever test framework you like to run one of these test cases. Just add one test case here. For JUnit, we have these rules which will allow you to pick your environment or to pick the application to run, which can be your real web app, but you can also have a source test web app if you want to run a specific web app with different web XML configuration. And then in these test cases, you specify which Zool you want to run on the current server, and then you pick your components based on the IDs. In this case, the component IDs work because these are server-side IDs, not the generated client-side IDs, the UUIDs in the browser, which make ZK difficult to test because the IDs change every time. And these are just the one you specify in your Zool files. And then one of my patterns I like is to have a method that returns the component. So whenever I call this method, the component agent will be fresh. So I have the latest version. I don't have any old instance available somewhere in a variable that maybe breaks my test. So we'll just always try to find it correctly, find it in the current page. So what it does is it tries to find the main window component in the desktop. And these agents are like these remote control interfaces. And if you want to get the real component, you can cast them using the as function. And then you get the real component class, and you can call all the getters and even setters of these classes to change components in your test cases, or to test if the components are contain the expected titles. For example, hello ZK, I'll just run this test. Run. What it does is it starts an embedded jetty also. But independent of the jetty runner we used above, it's using the Zets dependencies. And it's already done. Now my test case succeeded. And for example, if I break my test case, if my main Zool contains the wrong title, I'll just run my test again. Test case will fail. It will, as normal JUnit test, it will just tell me what's the difference and what is not as expected. And with these agents, we have the component agent we have lots of agent classes. If you check the class path, there are lots of, I think they call it interaction agents. Control, how to go there? I forgot. Just go there. And you see there are these, this is the agent interface, and the implementation is here. You see there are operation agents. No, these are the agent builders. Which are the ones? Yeah, open agent, input agent, focus agent, drag agent, click agent, check agent. For most components, we have this. And if there's something not supported, you can always send the event directly in a custom way. So you can extend these agents and add more. If you have custom components that need complicated interactions, it's possible to build your own. So what I do is, in this case, I just get my button agent, call the click function, and I expect my updated time label to change. So what we've seen in the browser here, when the page is loaded, I expect this to be I expect the label to just change when I click the button. So I have some kind of proof that my button click had an effect in my view model and updated the UI. So I just check that the initial time and the updated time are not the same. And you can get a list box age. You can get a list box, for example, and then check how many items there are in the model of the list box. If you expect there to be 4 items rendered because of a database query that should return 4 items, so you can simulate your whole server-side logic here. And as much as you test here, the less you have to test in real browser tests, which take a lot longer to execute. It also improves your development efficiency. And also these test cases are easier to write than real browser tests. Okay. Still, if there are questions, let me know. Of course, this whole thing also works with MVC. Yeah, we can also create a new MVC. I didn't get to this. Now I was planning to build a whole new controller and Zool file. Let's see how far we get. We just add a new page directly. So server is still running. Just add something. Add a new file. Just say our test.zool. Yeah, here we have our ZK file. We add a window and we give it a title. Wait, how can I do this? Go to test. Save the file, and it should instantly be here. So it also works with new files. Now it's my test window. What we want to add is a composer. So we say apply is like my composer. Of course, it will fail now because the composer doesn't exist yet. My class not found. So we just create it. In the source main Java, we create a new class, my composer. And we extend selector composer. We implement what's missing. How was this Control Shift O, right? Organize imp auxicos component. Yeah. And we just say do after compose. So we override the do after compose method, and we want to get a reference to a button. Now we say wire button private button equal. No, we don't equal. We just name test button. And what we do is we import everything, the Java Zool button and the wire annotations. And in our test Zool, we just add a button here. Button, and we say ID equals test button. And in the Java code, we give the test button a test button set label hello ZK. So, and if I did everything wrong, it should just work. Class not found my composer. Come on, what is wrong? I put it in the wrong package. See, it's in the ZK demo package. So I need to, of course, add this to my here to my composer. Okay, save and reload. There's my test button. And if we want a listener, we just use the add listen. I've seen your question. I will get to it in a second. Just want to wrap this up on click equals test btn public void handle click. And we just say clients.log. Here we are. Okay, I saved it again. We need to import this. Need to save again. And then the browser will hopefully like us. We click the button, and the code is there. And the URL of the JDK is included in the README I will share. Yes. Just search for DCEVM, Trava DCEVM. I have it. Oh, I put it in the chat so you can test directly. So I would like to hear if this works for any of you. Where is my? Oh, this is the wrong IDE. So now I'm confused by myself. Here are my training notes. Okay, so here is the link. So what I found is this just works when you add the setting and the chat. Okay, then there was another question. What are the advantages of using ZK frameworks compared to other frameworks, like Angular, React? So you need to know JavaScript or learn another new framework. Yeah, with ZK, you can do many things without interacting with JavaScript. But of course, it still lets you do JavaScript. If you want to do, there's a there's a complex client API in ZK that allows you to interact with any JavaScript object that you have a reference to. You can interact with third-party JavaScript libraries. You can build custom components that maybe just extend a div and initialize a completely different client-side library inside this div, like a mapping framework, a mapping library. I think we integrated open layers or leaflet.js. So advantages of ZK. In many cases, it's the advantage of your development experience. If you really want to use Java, then you can't use Angular or React. Some people just like Java more. So, or you have a requirement that you need to have all your code at server side. You can't share your internal details in JavaScript code at client side, because whatever you put into the React or Angular code is public, and you need the server side component anyway if you want to hide something. So in ZK, this is automatically hidden because the server is running by itself. In other cases, it's often you just have to maintain an existing project. Yeah, that's the framework. The benefit of ZK is we still maintain ZK, so you get security updates, you get version updates, you get new features. So it's not abandoned like other frameworks that don't exist anymore after, I don't know, ZK exists like 15 years already. So it's still maintained actively. We still support actively. So if you have questions, we can have live sessions with Zoom and help debug your environment. And to wrap up, and if I want to help you, if I want to help you, please be efficient and make sure your server starts quickly so we can debug and test efficiently, if possible. Or maybe we don't need to restart. The benefits of Zver's test coffee. I don't know a test coffee. I know test cafe, and and test cafe is a client-side framework, so it's not a benefits. It's a different testing. Yeah, in Zets tests are easier to write, easier to maintain, and they only run in server side. You can directly run them from the IDE. They run it quickly, and you have full access to the server-side classes. So if you want to test server-side state in your test cases, that's something you can do only with that. If you run a test cafe test, you're simulating a browser, and you use the JavaScript API to control the browser remotely. So the only information you have is what's in the browser. This is also important. You need to do some UI tests and to see if it runs in Firefox and Chrome and the other browsers supported by Test Cafe. So I see both of these tests complement each other. There's no versus. There is the benefits of using both together. But then don't do too many tests in Test Cafe because they are running in the browser, and do as much as possible in Zets because it just executes faster, and it makes you it somehow encourages writing more tests and running them more often, which is quite important during development. Well, as you all know. Okay, now there are more questions. I have problems with the IDs of the components that become dynamic for realization of unit tests. Exactly. That's one problem with Test Cafe, that you have to deal with the unique IDs of ZK. There is a workaround, not a workaround, there's a way to use the server-side IDs also at client-side using a JavaScript selector. So if you, for example, have this button, yeah, we gave it an ID, but the unique ID is this kind of IE blah, 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 P1. But it's still available via JavaScript API. So if we open the console, we can still get it. ZK $, it's similar to the jQuery, but you can get a client, a widget, a client-side widget by its server-side ID. And we use the extra prefix $. Then we just say test btn. And to get the DOM node, you use the $n. Oops, I have caps lock, $n function. And then you have the button. So if you write your test cases like this in Test Cafe, you can find almost any ZK component by its server-side ID. Load tests, a completely different topic. Very complicated. I have experience with JMeter. That's the only one I know. It doesn't run nicely. It's hard to maintain. It's a pain to maintain the test cases. Even if you have an ID generator, these tests will just constantly break because it's very difficult to generate unique IDs that don't change between test runs. It's just tough. I have no good recommendation. Yeah, JMeter is the best I can think of because I can support you with it. I've used it in the past. Other tools, I think LoadRunner. We've had someone using LoadRunner. There are lots of pitfalls using JMeter. For load tests, I use Selenium and Grid. For example, yeah, with Selenium, you also have the JavaScript API, so you can use these selectors syntax, these selectors here, to select also from Selenium. Selenium Test Cafe to me are similar, so I would say these are versus, and that is extra if you only want to test that your files parse and that your controllers and your view models work and do what they should do without having to simulate every user click. You can just skip the browser and just simulate the clicks using the Zets API. Okay. Yes, Selenium. Yeah, I've used Selenium in the past, and Test Cafe. The Test Cafe, to me, it works a bit nicer, or runs a bit nicer from command line. But both are equal to me. They have the same features, I would say. And they both run in browsers directly, so very important tests. All right, cool. Took a bit longer, but it's interesting to hear from you. And I think I will just stop this now. I will just stop the recording. I'll be here always for a few more minutes if there's something that is unrelated to the topic. So I will say bye-bye to everyone who is leaving already, and hope to see you next time. And I hope it was interesting. I could show something that is helpful, not only to you, but also to me, to help us to support you more efficiently. Okay, I'm stopping. Bye-bye.